Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Divine Feminine Healers podcast. I'm super excited to have Nidhi Pandya back on the podcast. I think it's like the third time now. I'm just so honored to have your wisdom here and to just be in your presence. It's always a fun time.
Thank you so much, Angelica. And it's always such a joy to talk to you. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. So something that I actually changed the title of this podcast since you've been on, and something that I've been asking all of my guests is how do you specifically connect with the divine feminine, or how does she express herself uniquely within you?
Okay, and I'm sure that question could mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. But for me, I think it's something that's very natural for me because I'm naturally connected more to my feminine. And I think surrender, constantly staying in flow and surrendering is something that's natural to me. Like people work towards, like people have to work away from that. And they're always controlling. For me, it's the opposite. Even things where I need few checks and balances. I don't have them because I'm just always like, that's the state I like to maintain. But at a physical level, you'll always, like dance is something that's very appealing to me, and it's never instructional dance. It's always like, let me go with the flow, or like a nice yoga flow, or listening to music of all types. It's not, doesn't have to just be spiritual, but anything that takes me in that state, which I wear a loose sense of time and space, and I just trust. Um, that's how I connect with my divine feminine, and it shows up in my clothing, in my loose attire, and even when long dresses and skirts were not in, I was the one who was still wearing them because I just connect to that, to a gypsy. I call it the gypsy in me.
Oh, I love that so much. That's so great just to connect to the core of what it's at. It's just like surrendering each moment and trusting in the divine within you. And I love how it gets expressed. I grew up a dancer like my whole life, so I absolutely love dancing and moving intuitively in your body. And I agree. Whenever I usually save like on Fridays because I work from home a lot. I love to dress up because it's like Venus Fridays is what I call it, and putting on flowy skirts and dresses. Ugh, it's just the best.
Yeah, yeah. And I tell people, like, let your hair down, like literally let your hair down. Like, don't think about it. Just like let it be unruly. Let it just take its own life and shape. And I think to me that also contributes a lot to this, just feeling that and trusting how my body wants to express itself.
So beautiful. So today I actually wanted to talk about cleansing because we're in fall and it's one of the best times to start cleansing in Ayurveda, and there's so much out there of cleansing in general in our Western culture, and then even within the subcategory of Ayurveda. So I'd love for you to share with our audience, what do the classical texts actually say about cleansing?
Yeah. And thanks for having this conversation. I think it is long due, right? So the classical texts they talk about when you talk about disease and when you start talking about treatment, right? There's two types, right? All treatment is categorized into two types. One is pacification treatment
Mm.
and one is cleansing. So they're completely different, right? I mean, we can talk about mini cleanses and we'll talk about that later from the doshas that accumulate from time to time. But seriously, when you think about treatment, you really tune into this. Where is there a need for pacification, which is also called shamanam, or shodhanam, which is cleansing? And pacification can happen, right? So most of the work that we do in the Ayurvedic world, the turmeric, the supplements, the ashwagandha, that's all pacification. It can happen with saying, hey, something is riling up in my body and I want to settle it down. But it's not being evacuated from my system. It's not being thrown out of my system. So that cleanse is not happening. Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to pause here. Um, pacification is when you're trying to pacify doshas or imbalances within your body. And then typically in terms of doshas, you would do it if you have vata dosha because vata dosha cannot be evacuated out of your body. It cannot be cleansed. It's just a state of the wind in your body. So you use pacification. Then there is cleansing. And cleansing is applicable when there is actual physical toxins, gunk in your system that needs to be thrown out. But here's the caveat, right? Not everybody can do a cleanse.
Mm.
Traditionally, the treatment is only valid. The sutras actually says if you have excessive kapha the substance kapha. You have excessive pitta, because both of them have a physical form.
Mm.
So if you have excessive kapha or you have excessive pitta, and we can even talk about what it means for the non-Ayurvedic population, and if you have reasonable amount of strength in your body and you're within a certain age bracket, then you may want to consider a cleanse. But if you have small amounts of toxins and imbalances and small amounts of kapha and pitta, and you have vata, then you're going to go towards the pacification. The pacification could mean either using herbs, either using sunlight, either using fresh air, exercise, breath work, fasting, whatever you need to pacify the doshas. And then, so cleansing is not for everyone, especially a full panchakarma cleanse is not for everybody. It's for a specific part of the population that actually has the strength and has enough doshas which need to be expelled from the body.
Yeah, that's so clear. And that's such a good distinction because, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, the ancient texts inexplicitly say 90% of all diseases is related to a vata imbalance. And so a lot of people, and yeah, like demyth that, because I don't know, that's something that I've been told from a teacher before, but I know you have a lot more wisdom on the classical text. But if a lot of people are having more vata imbalances, we're not going to want to purify the body more. We need more of that nurturance and the oiliness and building tissue again, not depleting the tissue again.
And yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think the texts, right, the ancient texts, as times change, texts evolve. So you'll see the oldest texts were loaded with advice for kapha, because as beings, we had this whole kapha explosion, and we had kapha bodies because we were in preservation mode. We were not living the active drying lifestyles that we are today. If you ask me today, most of the people that I meet have some form of vata imbalance, and then you have to be very careful to not throw that vata off. It's like free moving wind in your body. And when it's aggravated, we know that when wind gets trapped in places, even if you have a little window open and it's windy outside, it can just penetrate through the window and it can feel harsh. And that's what wind does. That's what vata does in our bodies as well. So yes, being always careful of, vata and how it acts. And that's why being very, very, the word cleanse sounds so good because as a culture, we love cleaning. I mean, cleaning it feels good, it feels sparkly, but you may not always need it. It's like saying that I have 5 items of furniture in my house and I'm going to clean it all and I'm going to have nothing left, right? So when do you clean and how much do you clean and what do you clean really becomes important.
For sure. So oftentimes in our Ayurveda world, we really associate cleansing with khichdi. And I'm just so curious, like what you found in the classical books about using khichdi for cleansing.
So, and I think we will talk about khichdi, but I find it very important for us to talk about what is the cleanse that I'm talking about, that the classical texts are talking about, which is the panchakarma. It's the panchakarma cleanse, which is 5 procedures done. Doshas or toxins are mobilized in your body. So toxins which may have previously homogenized with your substances, with your blood, with your plasma, with your cellular tissue. Those toxins are you get them moving, you get them to your digestive system or wherever the closest route. When I say the closest route, it uses your orifices, your mouth and your anus, as well as your blood, your pores, to evacuate those doshas and your nose and your nostrils. So it says, hey, do I have phlegm in my chest? How do I mobilize this phlegm? And then maybe we can do, if it's congested in your mouth, in your face region and sinuses, then your cleanse would include something called a nasya, which is instilling good amount of warm oil in your nose, taking steam and expelling it out through your nostrils. Hey, I have a lot of things sitting in the upper part of my digestive system. I've moved things from my body and now they're sitting in the upper part of my digestive system. It's going to take a while for it to go through my digestive system and come out, through my bowel movement. So now you do induced emesis, which can also be, say, induced vomiting with herbs. And the cleanse now is through this orifice, this opening of my body, and say, hey, I have this sticky heat throughout my digestive system. Then you would do herbs and you would have, like a purge. You would do a purge, but it's not a blind purge. It's a very specific action. You've gotten the heat specifically and the hot toxins to come to your gut. You found a way to digest them and scrape them and bring them out through a purge. Then, the anus has a separate passage that all together. So if you have a lot of vata is connected to your pelvis, right? Because we are having babies, so you're pushing. The wind pushes your bowel movement, wind pushes your reproductive fluids, the wind pushes your babies, your menses. So it's a wind dominant region, the pelvis. So to regulate the wind, then there is an oil enema, which kind of goes and regulates the microbiome in the anus. So we talked about the nasya, which is the nose. We talked about the induced emesis. We talked about the purgation. We talked about the enema. And the fifth one is bloodletting, right? So the bloodletting, either using leeches, which is also used in Chinese medicine. Your blood, when its volume or heat increases, the viscosity of the blood. I find this very important to share. That's why I'm doing it very quickly. With the viscosity or the heat in your blood increases, right? It's like, oh my God, it's hot and stuffy in your system. Like think about it like a really hot and humid room. And you can't, and that's the blood that's supplying nutrients to every single organ. So when you have this hot and slimy blood throughout your body, it can feel very intense. There's no way you can get your blood to your digestive system. So then you what would you do when a room felt like this? You would open the window a little bit. You would let some air come in. So bloodletting is this act of taking a certain amount of blood, like how you would go for blood donation. A lot of people start feeling better when they go for blood donation. So you kind of let out a little bit of blood. So now your overall volume of blood has lowered and it's dispersed a little bit better. And that gives relief, right? So these are the 5 processes. And depending on the person, you would choose the cleanse. Now in the modern world, right, we've come up with this khichdi cleanse. And people are alarmed when I tell them that the text actually uses khichdi as an opposite food. So I've tried to wrap my food. So khichdi is a nourishing, complete meal. I've tried to wrap my head around why does it feel cleansing for us? Or why do we call it a khichdi cleanse? And what I've come up with is because, where we've come in the world, we're just use our lives today. People are eating stale food, processed food, meats. Compared to what you would be eating on a normal day, khichdi is a cleaner food. So the cleaner food in our mind is associated with, hey, this is a cleanse. But it's really not a cleanse. It is really saying that I'm going to give my body something that it can actually make good use of and thereby feel better in my body. So I want to be very clear that under no circumstance is khichdi the cleanse. But khichdi is a cleaner food, and going to the khichdi diet for a few days can help. The texts also say that because khichdi has lentils and rice, it may not be easy for everyone to digest. It's a vata pacification food if you have good agni.
Yeah, it's so important. And I often think too, I think because it's like the mono diet of it and the body just getting to just focus on not having to focus on digesting all these different things, that it's just focusing on it knows, and the body just knows how to produce the certain amounts of digestive enzymes to break down those things because it's the same thing they're eating every day. And then it can help to assist all the other systems of the body because digestive system is moving really quickly. So then those toxins can go to the digestive system and be processed, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I think because it's more focused action, it's a complete meal. It contains all the 6 tastes. So it's really doing something very loving for your body. It's like going for a massage, and really it's like a self-care. So I would say it's a lot of self-care for the digestive system. But provided your agni is good, a lot of people have a hard time breaking down lentils and rice. And sometimes I hear, oh, I signed up for this 3-day khichdi cleanse, but I'm feeling very bloated. What can I do? Right? So it's not a universal truth. That's where you stand. Traditionally, khichdi was not used as a cleanse, but of course you can modify your khichdi. You can still choose to say, I'm going to, try this. And we can talk about how that can be modified for it to be lighter and feel better.
Awesome. I'd love to hear what were some of the traditional ways or diets that were used to cleanse?
So, like I said, right, cleanse was just what I told you. When you use the word cleanse in the traditional Ayurveda world, it has to mean one of these few things. But then when you actually did a procedure like that, or let's say you were sick and your Agni suffered, how do you start building back up your Agni and your body? Now, those are the lighter foods. And for our purpose, we may say, hey, those are cleansing foods, or those are lighter foods. You know, I would refrain for in my practice to use the word cleanse for those, just because that's just because of the way I've done it. I've kept it a little bit traditional, but I'm not against somebody else using that. I just want to clarify that, right? But of course, cleanse, if I say cleanse, it would only mean one of these five processes, either in their full form or in a short form, like in a smaller version, which is also possible. And we can talk about how people can do it at home. But otherwise, there's a lot of good foods which build back, which bring your Agni back. In fact, I tell people how you recover from a fever or COVID or a food poisoning can do so much for you. Will really determine how your new tissue is built. And in Ayurveda, that's called something called a samsarjan karma. Then gradually bringing back the fire, how you had a bonfire, right? And you gradually can let the bonfire grow. And the way you do this is the first food is rice broth.
Mm.
So rice broth had tremendous place in the text, and that's rice cooked, you know, in 8 times of water, and you use, as a first food, you just use the broth, and it has enough starch, it has enough nutrients. You put a pinch of ginger powder, dried ginger, to make it even more digestible. So soak rice, cook it into a broth, remove the grains. As you start feeling better, you keep some of the grains. As you feel even better, you keep more grains on till you're actually at a rice congee. So you maybe, 4 to 6, you kind of gradually go from that broth version to a congee version. And many cultures have a rice congee, which is like pound rice made in a soupy form. Then you would do like a lentil soup, like a water-based lentil soup, which means the lentil soup is made with a lot of water. Sometimes even peels, some of the peels can actually be taken out of there to make it even lighter. And again, you would do a pinch of dried ginger. Then there are some other foods that are considered super light and cleansing. Like I tell people, hey, when you come back from vacation, this is what you want to do. You actually want to do you actually want to go to these broths, And I said, if you're very hungry, then you may do a little bit of rice for lunch and the broth in the evening. But there are certain fruits that you can include as well. Pomegranates, good quality organic grapes. You can have amla, you know, um, even candied amla. Ayurveda allows that, maybe a piece or two. So these things are okay, they're permitted. And then you gradually build back. And you notice, right? Like I do this for my daughters when they are, when they're getting better, like they know the taste and the smell of rice broth, from a distance because they've done it so many times. And I tell people, if this is not palatable for you, saute some celery and take it out. Saute some, anything that works for you. Ideally, you wouldn't want to have that, but of course we make things palatable and that's fine. Or put a little bit of parsley and that gives a lot of flavor. Right? But those are the foods that are considered nourishing and light and supportive to your Agni, all of it.
That makes so much sense because if you think about it when you're sick and Agni is lost and you don't have an appetite, but you still need to get those nutrients, it's like khichdi would be so heavy for the system. Even though it's easy to digest, if you don't have an appetite, you're not going to be able to fully process that, and that can cause more ama and toxins. So I love the idea of bringing broths in, and especially because if someone has a way vata imbalance, the appetite is variable. It's not really there. So it is important that we're not even crumbling the Agni even more with something that's more heavy and dense.
I absolutely, absolutely. Khichdi wouldn't. So my girls, if they were sick, they would get khichdi day 4,
Mm,
right? It would be day 4 when their Agni has come up gradually.
right. It's like you work your way back up to khichdi.
Absolutely. So you do the rice, you do the lentil water, you mix rice and lentils, and then you can go to a khichdi.
I love it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned travel, which is really interesting because I feel like, and this is personally for me too, like whenever I go to Mexico and I get back, like there's some, even though I try to avoid the water at some point, like there's always like a parasite or something that I get. And what I love about Ayurvedic cleansing, the actual act of cleansing, and using things like pastis to remove, it's been so incredible in that way. So I love to hear specifically, and I know Ayurveda calls this krimi, the parasites. How does Ayurvedic cleansing specifically help with parasites?
So I'll tell you, we want to first understand the nature of parasites. And you know me, I have to go to that first before I, otherwise I can't. Otherwise, I just feel like I'm just dispensing information, right? Um, so, where do parasites exist in the universe is the first question to ask. And usually parasites are in tropical places, right? Like when it's very hot and humid, and there's a level of slime where you'll see mosquitoes and you'll see, in fact, even lice, right? And what's really funny is that when you see kids who are prone to lice, they always have hot, sweaty heads.
Hmm.
You'll see people with complete dryness in their scalp, they rarely ever get lice, right? And something might leach on, it won't even survive because parasites love those warm, tropical, really a tropical summer. So, what happens in our gut when we have a lot of slime in our gut? We've eaten a lot of, let's say, fatty foods, a lot of cold ice cream, and sometimes water, right? Water can cause krimi or parasites because of the nature of water. If you had flowing river water, right? If you had water from a stream, spring water, because it's in motion. Like what happens, Anjalka, when we sometimes leave water in our tub and you go on a vacation and you come back and your tub becomes slimy,
Hmm.
right? I don't know if you ever noticed that, but like anything become because water is so prone to bacteria. Water that is in motion, that will never happen to. Moving water. So in Ayurveda, you consume moving water, which has been exposed to wind. And that by itself is the cleansing of the water. So sometimes when we travel to places and we go for bottle, like when I go to India, I don't do bottled water because I know the bottled water will probably get me more sick because it's stagnant, it's been sitting. So I will do tap water. I will boil it down to have. So this is one of the reasons why people say, hey, the water didn't work for me. Is because if it's any form of still, and sometimes even through the tap, the water could be contaminated because in the reservoir, it may be sitting and still for a long time in a hot place, right? So those are the things to be mindful about. Traditionally in Ayurveda, for a krimi, you don't do a full cleanse right away, right? There's a lot of drying you cause first inside your gut. You kind of dry that slime. And you know what happens? All that moisture lives in your digestive system and the skin becomes dry for a lot of people who have parasites. You see a lot of kids who have parasites, they have dry skin, but they're hungry all the time and it's sugary and, they crave sugar and they've eaten sugar and the sugar has created slime, right? So you don't directly go for a cleanse. You actually go for other drying substances. But there are some purgations. There's some kind of purging herbs. There's some kind of bastis, very specific to your condition that you could use for a parasite cleanse. There are some substances like aradvad is a certain substance, which is this is an herb called aradvad, which is particularly good, but the formulations, the traditional formulations for krimi or parasites, which can actually help you expel the parasites, are useful. I would never recommend anyone to just rely upon that because you may not even do a good job because just how you see, virus evolve and bacteria, you get a flu shot, I mean, which I don't, but people get a flu shot and the next year they're like, oh, again, the virus is mutated. Similarly, these parasites have become smarter
Mm.
than so the same substances don't work for them. But if you change the environment of your gut, and then you may use help of these cleanses, uh, these cleansing herbs, which can actually give you a purge. Um, in that case, you may have more positive, effective results. Otherwise, people are like, "Oh, I just did a cleanse and I had my parasites come out, but they're back again now."
Mm.
Right? So we hear that so many times. But yeah, and there's a lot of substances, including cumin, including Embilla rice, also called vidanga. There are certain types of, onion seeds, like the black seeds. So all of those you use a combination depending on where the parasites are and how they've affected your body.
Mm. That's so helpful too, because if we think about it, truly, when we attract any type of disease, it's, Agni was low, right, to a certain degree. Because there's been times when I've gone on travel and literally ate and drank the same thing as my friend, and my friend didn't get the parasites, but I did. It's going to a weakness in the body, and Agni needs to be restored. So, you're not going to do a cleanse if Agni is not strong, and if you're just purging out from the body and not building that inner strength within the body, which is so important.
Absolutely. And more and more, right? The more I practice and the more I've been, talking and teaching, the more, I've kind of really coined this concept, the inner climate. It all just comes to your inner climate. All restoration is coming back to your optimum inner climate. And then you never need to treat a disease. You're never treating a disease. You're just working with that climate change that has happened. And as soon as you come, suddenly now you have summer and things are growing in your spring and everything goes so beautifully in your body. But it's the climate change that we've caused inside our bodies, which can lead to imbalances. Yeah. So, like, knock on wood, it's been such a good run for me, Angelica, because I've taken more than 40 flights in the last 2.5 years during the pandemic. I
Wow.
haven't gotten sick once. Honestly, if I will never mask unless somebody sits, really on my head, because I trust in my body's environment. And I've seen it enough times that the minute when the inner climate is off, you get compromised.
Right. Totally. Yeah, I mean, that if we get to the heart of Ayurveda, it's living in alignment with our own internal rhythms and creating the optimal environment for the body to heal. It just makes so much sense. And you really do have to trust that. And the trust is in all these practical techniques that we have. And wow, like my dinacharya and my diet, that's good for my body. And I could feel my Agni and I'm eating consciously. Like these are all just kind of like markers and parameters that we can use to sustain our confidence in our body's ability to heal, and no matter what is going to be thrown at us.
Absolutely. 100%.
So, what are some of those practical ways someone can do a cleanse, let's say at home, or starting to dabble and starting to strengthen their Agni, and they're feeling it? Fall is a great time to it's transition. There's so many things happening. Kind of want to clean out shop. We're in Virgo season in Vedic astrology too. What would that look like?
So I'd say the first thing you want to do is start working your dinners out of your system, right? So if you really want to go light, right, you want to create a protocol for the whole day, and we can even talk about certain substances to include if you wanted to, right? But I would say the safest thing to do at home if you want to include substances is purging. Purging is the only safe method to do at home, and I'll tell you how we can do that. But the first thing, even before you do that, is start an intermittent fast. Langhanam or fasting is, very dear to Ayurveda. And provided you're not depleted, provided you're not anxious, dry, or you don't have a lot of vata aggravation, you want to stop eating at sunset. You start with that. You do that for about 3 days. You want to stop eating at sunset, and you want to go back eating, once the sun is risen and your metabolic activity kicks back in. But you also want to eat only fresh, warm foods on those days. Then the next thing you want to do is start making dinner lighter. And for that, I recommend either rice congee, rice broth, or like a lentil watery soup where you may take off the fiber if that's not, and you want to include spices in that, right? Then what you might also want to do is then it's not a bad time for lunch to include a light khichdi. I'd say pound the rice well. I'd say soak everything for a long time. Keep the portions small. If you want to do fruit, do it, mid, if it's in season, do it like mid-afternoon rather than doing it in the morning, because that'll again lower your Agni. And do keep it to one fruit, one seasonal fruit a day. People ask me, what do you do in the morning? You can either have, I would say, if you actually want to go lighter, milk may not be a good idea, like cooked milk. Ayurveda loves cooked milk, and I love cooked milk, but you could do a diluted version of a cooked milk, or you can, do mix, make a tea with dried ginger. Dried ginger really helps to support your Agni as well as take things down where they need to be. And if you do that, right, like let's say even for just 3 days, where you do the morning hot cup of water with dried ginger. Make sure you nourish your body with oil when you're giving it less food to eat. The oil is also food, and it's from an external channel, so it's not being shared with your digestive system in the same manner. For lunch, you can eat a light khichdi or a rice-based item. I would always say rice-based, short grain aged rice-based item. For dinner, you can go lighter and eat and consume a broth-based item. If you feel the need for vegetables, I would say in your khichdi, add greens, add like a particular kind of squash, zucchini, courgette. I would say stay away from peppers, carrots, onions, potatoes, all of those. Even root vegetables are kind of heavy when you want to go that light. For your broth, if you want something more, I tell people you can throw in again. You can throw in a little bit of celery, a little bit of zucchini, and then you can make the broth more flavorful if your palate is really displeased with this food. Or that lentil water you can add. I personally love adding parsley to my lentils or cilantro. In terms of what you can consume to actually have a good purge, I say you take a soak trifla. You know, if you're used to trifla, you can do 1 teaspoon. If you're not, half a teaspoon. And you can soak black raisins. Again, if you're used to them, you can take 15. If you're not used to black Thompson raisins, you can take about 7 or 8. And you soak them both independently. In the morning, you take the trifla concoction and you mix it with the water from the raisins, just the water. You can keep the raisins out, you can consume them independently. And then you boil this whole mixture. So it's the trifla plus the trifla water and the raisin water. And this whole thing can be boiled down to half or 1/4. So, till it's evaporated and it becomes a concentrate. And then you strain it out. And then while it's still warm, you want to consume it as a tea. So it's a trifla raisin tea is what I call it. That will give you some bowel movements for most people, but in a more healthy way. The trifla won't be as drying because of the water from the raisins. And the raisins, again, by themselves have this cooling action. So what it's going to seek to do is scrape, cool, and purge in a mild manner. And this can be done, I say, anywhere from 3 to 7 days. I tell people you can even do this when you come back, from vacation. This is what I usually recommend, and it's a very mild, safe way to cleanse. And then when you start eating, you want to gradually. You don't want to be like, my cleanse is over, I'm going to go binge. How gradually you start eating again, right? So then you can start introducing some of the fall veggies and actually get into season gradually. Because this transition time, it's called Sandhi Kala, between two seasons, between two times of the day, between day and night, at dawn and dusk, is a time when the doshas in the universe are the most volatile. And most sickness happens then because things are in transition, they're adjusting. And when things are adjusting, they're volatile.
Wow, such great practical tools for that. I love using the raisin juice because let me tell you, trifla just alone is a little difficult to bear. And I mean, I have a willpower, like I'm fine with it, but when I give it to my clients and then I forget how bitter it could be for those, that's such a good hack for them. It brings that little bit of sweetness to it. And also I love just because raisins can also help with more of that ease of elimination as well. Sometimes even trifla is like not enough.
Yeah.
And I also love the practicality of just coming back to the gunas, like the basics of Ayurveda of, okay, I want to feel light in my body. Intuitively, what does that mean for me? Like, how can I scale back on my meals right now and find a bit of lightness to it? Is that dinner? Is that lunch? Is that breakfast? Like, this doesn't have to be everything that Nidhi said that you would take each of these necessarily. Like, take it in bite sizes, try one thing out and see how that really sustains you. And not necessarily like going from one extreme to the next is so huge. Like, oh my gosh, how many times when I run my Ayurvedic cleanses and so many people immediately think like, okay, day one, like, and all of a sudden I'm a new person. I'm completely eating differently. Like, that's so harsh on the body. Think about it, right? It's like going into a cold plunge and like not easing into anything. And so it's a shock to the system. And if we're already having vata-ness and trauma hold, it just like contains that even more. So I love the act of just easing in small little baby steps, digestible, and trusting your intuition. Like, what feels good? Like, you're right, like I've been overdoing dinner, a light dinner sounds really nice right now, or I have been wanting to dabble in intermittent fasting, like that feels really good to you. Like, that's all Ayurveda is nurturing us to do.
Absolutely. No, you've summed it really well.
I love it. Okay, so I think everyone has a lot of good practical tools here to start cleansing, dipping their toes in, and all that good stuff. And while also honoring the tradition of Ayurvedic cleansing what it means to actually use those 5 processes that Nidhi so beautifully and eloquently said. So any questions, of course, you can always ask us and our community. And yeah, Nidhi, I'm so interested to hear what you've been up to and how our community can work with you.
Yeah, so you know what I'm actually up to? I am always designing unique courses
Mm.
for everyone and for the community. And when I say unique, I think my goal is not to just teach Ayurveda the way I feel like it's been taught, is to really take it deeper, make it more experiential than academic, and very immersively. And I've been working on offering courses on different topics. How do you live longer, how do you menopause and women's health and children and fertility and all of those things, and those can be found on my website. I also, as you may know already, Angelica, I regularly blog on my Instagram, and that's just like a little fun thing that I do every evening, whether I'll write a text post or I'll do a reel. I also work with clientele one-on-one. I work with people one-on-one over a period of 6 months, where I take them on a transformation journey of their mind and body. And that I do, maybe just 2 or 3 people a month. I also, now I'm designing a program for practitioners. So for those practitioners who need that little extra support, mentorship, finding their way, I'm actually designing a program for that, which should be launching end of the year. So that's something that people can look out for. Otherwise, I'm always doing speaking engagements, writing engagements and workshops. Yeah. So I know that sounds like a lot of different things, but it's all the same.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much because no matter where someone is on their journey, you have something for them. Whether it's a course and they're looking for something specific, they need more holding, they got one-on-one. And if you don't follow my Ayurvedic Life, Nidhi's Instagram already, we'll have all of this linked in the show notes, of course. Give her a follow. It's just as what you get right here. Experiential, like she does her work in the traditional textbooks. She validates it through her own experiences, and she teaches in such simple, digestible, and accessible ways and super practical. Like super clear. We're not like cloudy here. I know exactly what to do, and I love your directness.
Thank you so much. It's always such a joy to talk to you and answer these really relevant questions.
Yeah, of course. Yes, thank you so much for being on. I'll have all that linked in the show notes. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
All right, Angelica.
Bye.
Bye.